If your wind farm could talk, what would it say? Would it tell you it's feeling good, productive, or that it's feeling tired or needs some backup? If your wind farm could talk, would it warn you of potential problems before they actually happen and help you discover new ways to turn wind into opportunity? Wind farms have a lot to say, and now you can listen. The future of wind farm technology is coming. Are you ready for it?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here this morning to attend this roundtable about basically corporate clients in wind energy, which is something pretty new and probably supposed to become bigger and bigger, as we'll see with those gentlemen here. First we'll see why would a blue chip company want to buy wind energy, and why should energy generators want to sell it to them, and then see if it's easier to do that on some markets than others, and also what difference it makes for both parties to work together, because it's not the historical, traditional way for wind energy sector to work, and either for blue chip companies that are not used for a long time to buy this kind of energy. And then we'll see how things might evolve in the future. So first of all, I will ask each of you, and maybe starting with Mr. Kostra and going back here, to present yourself briefly and your company, even though I think everyone in the room knows all the companies, and maybe give us the latest news of the company, of the market, in approximately, let's say, 3-5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. Hopefully less than that. I'm not that interesting. My name is João Costeira. I'm an executive director of EDP Renewables and also the chief operating officer for Europe and South America. EDP Renewables is right now the 4th largest wind producer in the world. We're the 3rd in Europe and the 3rd in the US. And we have roughly 9 gigawatts installed, 5 in Europe and 4 over 8 countries, and 4 in the US. Over the last few years, well, we followed a little bit the same trend as the renewable energy, and we've been moving a little bit from Europe to the US, where we're investing right now more than 2/3 of our capex over the last 2 years, and it will remain like this at least for 2 years more. As we know, things in Europe have not been obvious, and although there are some countries who have kept their pace, like France, for instance, there were a few that's changed dramatically, and I would point out Spain and Romania, for instance, in which we endured dramatic changes. And unfortunately, we have not seen no action from the European Union to make sure that investors are treated fairly. And therefore the obvious choice is to move, and that's a little bit what we have been doing. We will keep investing in a few markets in Europe. Most of investment will be made in North America and also in Brazil.
Thank you very much. Mr. Davis?
Hello, I'm Glenn Davis. I'm with Renewable Energy Systems. I am the CEO of the Americas region. Most of you are probably familiar with RES. We were founded in the late 70s in the UK. Dr. Ian Mays, who's the founder, happens to be here. Ian. I've been with RES just over 2 years now, and it's a remarkable company for many reasons. Chief among those, I think, is the company's ability and determination to evolve with the markets that we serve. And the evolution of RES has occurred on many dimensions. From a technology perspective, RES began as a wind company, and much of its life was exclusively in wind. But as other markets such as solar, energy storage, transmission, and distributed demand-side markets have evolved, RES has evolved with them, and so our offering now includes all of those technologies. We've also evolved geographically. We are in many countries around the world as markets open up to the type of services and products that we deliver. We are, I should mention, a developer and a constructor of projects. Again, an evolution within the company. More recently and relevant to this panel, though, is the evolution in our customer base. The traditional model in the US is to sign a power purchase agreement for large projects with a regulated utility. Here in Europe, more to sell the power output through feed-in tariffs. Both of those in all parts of the world are evolving to the point where in the US, we are now serving not just the utility space, but the corporate space that we'll be talking about here. We have a project that we developed and built in Texas called Kichai that has a power purchase agreement with Microsoft, and we're very active in the space elsewhere. In Europe, as you know, the feed-in tariff regime is going away or is under threat in many countries, and we very much look to the corporate buying world as the next market, the sort of natural progression, and our experience in the Americas is being brought to bear here in Europe.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Massimo Derchi. I'm CEO of Renew. EAG, which is our parent company, has been for 70 years an oil company, a refiner, which in recent years decided to exit entirely the refining business, which was in a deep crisis, and basically reinvested equity in renewables, and specifically in wind. Why we did so? Because we believe that wind business and renewables is an infrastructural business, so a long-term one with relatively low return, but stable and secure. Now, after all the things that happen in some markets, it may be questionable to define it as a secure business, but as a matter of fact, it is a business that should be like that. We have grown in Italy. We have become the largest operator a couple of years ago, and then we expanded in Europe. We currently have 1.7 gigawatt in 6 countries. We are present in Italy, in France, in Germany, in Poland, in Romania, and in Bulgaria. We come from an industrial story, so we have an industrial approach on wind as well. Where possible, we want not only to own and operate, but we have our team taking care of maintenance of wind farms, electrical substation, and so on and so forth. At least we do that where we have sufficient mass, and we can therefore have synergies. And the markets I mentioned are the markets where we are, where possible, so where there is no threat that there will be or there is a regulatory uncertainty, are also the market where we count on to keep on growing.
Thank you. And Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Lewis. I'm COO for E.ON Climate and Renewables. We're one of the largest renewable energy companies globally since we started back in 2008 to invest significantly in renewable energy, principally wind, on and offshore. We've invested roughly 10 billion euros since then, and we have a portfolio of around 5.4 gigawatts, 50-50 between the US and Europe. And we're currently present in 8 different countries. I think the most important trend that we've seen in the European market, and which is driving E.ON's strategy, has been the distinction between what you might call the traditional energy world of centralized generation, global commodities, system security, and the new world of customer-centric, smart meters, the evolution of renewable energy. And as a consequence of those trends, we are splitting E.ON into 2 different companies as of January the 1st. E.ON will retain the name for the customer-centric business, and the renewable energy business, and Uniper will be the business that will focus on global commodities and centralized generation, coal, gas, etc. And that, after an extremely challenging year, is set to happen on January the 1st. As far as our renewable strategy is concerned, that won't change. We'll remain focused on onshore wind, offshore wind, and indeed solar PV. Onshore wind is principally at the moment in the US. We recently approved a project in Texas, another project in Texas to complement our portfolio there. And what we see in Texas, of course, is fantastic load factors of over 50%, which has really made a very significant contribution to driving down the levelized cost of energy there. Offshore, our focus is the UK and Germany. We brought 2 projects into operation this year, over 500 megawatts, Amram Bank in Germany and Humber Gateway in the UK, representing about €2 billion of investment. And we started the construction of the Rampion offshore wind farm in the UK off the coast of Brighton. I think the main change we've seen in terms of our offshore strategy is the way we finance those projects. Traditionally, we did those 100% on balance sheet, and in the future will be a more partnering approach, and indeed for the Rampion project, we have the Green Investment Bank and Enbridge on board with just under 50% of the share, and I think that's a key development. The utilities who hold most of the options to invest in large offshore projects don't have the balance sheet to deliver those projects, and we need to be much more creative about how we finance them. As far as today's panel discussion is concerned, I think the challenge has already been mentioned. We've seen feed-in tariffs and other type of government support start to fall away, notably in the UK most recently for onshore wind, and I think the corporate market for renewable energy is one that has to grow to reflect that reduction, and indeed to reflect the fact that the cost of wind power and renewable energy has come down significantly, and it now makes sense to sign long-term contracts to take advantage of those low energy costs at a fixed price.
Thank you very much. So François, I will ask you not to present Google, but merely
it will take some time, yes.
In ways linked to today's subject and what you do there, please.
Yes, so, well, thanks for having us first, and for EWEA and
you
the
are
CERT.
the client here.
So my name is Francis and I'm Director in Technical Infrastructure. What I do is basically looking after data center and energy, especially in Europe and based in Paris. Just to give some background on the data center, not Google as a whole, Google has very large facility, 14 over the world. We have 4 in Europe, Belgium, Finland, Netherlands, and Ireland. And we've embarked on a journey to basically make sure that those data centers are powered by renewable energy. And why does it matter for Google? Because data centers are typically like 80 to 90% of our carbon footprint. So if we green the data center footprint, then we have a pretty good shot at greening Google footprint, basically. A couple of things that we've done in 2015, we've been very active in the energy or renewable energy sector in general, because this is very close to our, founders' kind of heart, and they really feel
in lots
good.
of different ways, actually.
Yeah, and in 2015, we've actually done some investment even in new developing countries. Like in Kenya, for instance, you might have heard about this announcement, where that's the largest wind farm in Africa right now. We've also done investment in solar in South Africa. So it's also a pure investment. I'll come back to that. What I also wanted to say, we've just announced we're going to develop a data center in Alabama. And the reason I mention that is very symbolic, because this is going to be around a retired coal plant. So there's a symbol there that we use infrastructure from the coal industry that is not used anymore to put data center, and we'll find ways to use renewable energy there and to bring renewable energy there. Last thing I wanted to say is our offices started to be bigger as well, and we've done a deal in California a power purchase agreement to power the office as well there with a 43 megawatt wind farm. So that's what happened in 2015, but we did a few other things before. Yeah.
Yes. Well, then you will tell us what you did before, actually, because you've been buying renewable energy to fuel your data centers, for example, for a while. So maybe you could tell us since when and well,
Yeah.
and
So
where, and later you will tell us why.
Absolutely. And so before I go to the data center properly, I think it's worth clarifying what we do in general. We have a multi-pronged approach to renewable energy. We do pure renewable investment where we're interested in return. They completely decouple from our data center footprint. You've heard about this for probably a few years now. I think we've invested more than 2 billion, 2.5 gigawatt.
That's
On the
what
data
we've
center
been
side,
said.
this is for our operation, so this is linked to our operation. So I actually have a slide of all the power purchase agreement we've done. So we've started in 2010 in the US with the first deal of 114 megawatt. We've done a few more, and then in 2013 we started doing some in Sweden. We've done one also in the Netherlands last year. It's an agreement where we actually partner with the utility there. So there's a mix of partner, utility, and developer, directly developers. And the last thing I would mention for our I would say renewable energy strategy, we also look at some innovation sometimes. We're an innovating company, so we get involved with startups. Like we acquired a company called Makani that is doing like kite-type windmills, where it goes way higher than normal windmills to get stronger wind there.
Are they already working somewhere?
They are developing some prototype, and they're looking for they are in discussion to actually have some real implementation. So this is what's happening. And for people not really aware of what it is, it's actually looks like a plane with propellers, and most of the time it gets wind, and then there's a cable kind of connecting to the world. We've also done a project called Sunroof, where we use our technology to actually tell people this is a potential of your home roof, and then you can be put in contact with solar providers. So a bit of an overview of what we're doing in renewable energy as a whole. Now let me focus to data centers. So why we've done this? Well, I think we have we set ourselves a very high bar, we think, in terms of trying to get more renewable energy on the grid. So all those projects were actually not existing, and before we actually committed to a power purchase agreement. So it's important for us to have new projects. The one thing I'd say as well as a customer, I'm in a business unit, right? So it's not just a moral thing to do. For us, it has to make business sense, and that's very important.
We can imagine that. We wouldn't suspect you to do that just for moral reasons.
Yeah, but there is definitely sometimes I would say some assumption that renewable should come at a premium, and we've already started discussing this. Price of renewable are going down with technology, and it's important that it continue to do so. So, it makes business sense for us to do those deals. And so those are the two. And we typically try to use renewable energy directly in our data centers. So if you think about what we've done in the Nordics, we actually buy the entire output of the wind farm directly from the developer. Then we use a partner to actually transfer it to Finland and to balance. Because obviously one of the problems we have is, our data centers works 24/7, and if there is no wind, well, our users still are doing search queries, so we need to still power data centers. So we use other partner in the market to shape it and then to transfer it directly.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So today, Google is the biggest corporate buyer of...
So in terms of renewable, we actually, of wind in the US, we've done a little bit of scanning of what happened in the transaction. So we think we are. It's not a goal to be the biggest. Obviously, we'd be happy to have other people doing more than we do. But in the US, we've done around 850 megawatt of transaction. And what you've seen is, I think that's interesting, and I'm sure some other people on the panel I'd be really happy to hear their thought about it. You definitely see an accelerating trend here, where, so after us, all the tech industry, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook started doing this as well. We see other players like Walmart or IKEA also being very active in that field, and I think it will continue.
Okay, So it means that in 2010 you were the only ones to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're definitely a pioneer in this.
And if we summarize by size, clearly we.
Yes, you like that one, huh?
Yeah. For the moment, we like that one. I mean, to be honest, we'd really like to be some other to come to our. And we probably forgot some transaction that the other people on the panel might be aware of. So happy to.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for these and those figures that show that it is definitely an interesting topic to tackle this morning. So I will ask Mr. Lewis from E.ON. I think you don't work with corporate clients yet, but you hope to be soon, and so you organize yourself in that way. Could you tell us how and why?
I think if I address the why first, I think it's because the market has evolved very, very quickly for several reasons, as we've just seen. I mean, the first point in the past is we were firstly comfortable with merchant risk. That was our business model, not just in renewables, but also in the conventional business, and we would trade that power, and that was a model we had, and we were comfortable to take it. Second thing was there were very strong support mechanisms in most markets. Thirdly, we often found that utilities who were in the US particularly mandated with renewable portfolio standards were the prime buyers of renewable energy where we did want to take a PPA. And that's where we focused our efforts in the past, because that was the major off-taker. And the final point is, before around 2013, when the market started to take off, there weren't actually that many opportunities. So it was quite a niche market in the past. So what's changed is firstly, I think we've seen more volatile and lower power prices in most markets, driven by different trends, fracking in the US, and paradoxically in a lot of Europe, driven by more and more low marginal cost renewable energy coming onto the system, which is driving down costs. And this is a key point, that the more and more renewable energy you get on the system, the less and less the wholesale power price sends a meaningful signal about when to invest. So we need to devise new mechanisms, and this is what corporate PPAs are doing. I think the other key point is that we've also seen support reducing for renewable energy from various governments. And I've already mentioned the UK, where now the CFD mechanism is not open to onshore wind. And therefore, we have to be more creative and talk to other potential counterparties and build up a more customer-focused business. I also think the other key thing, and why the market has taken off, is because the cost of renewables has come down so significantly, and it is getting to the point in many markets where we have high load factors or high solar resource, where on a levelized cost of energy basis, it is now a competitive source of energy. The challenge for renewables is, of course, it's very difficult to earn the capital cost on a merchant price. As I've already mentioned, if more and more low marginal cost energy comes on the system, the tendency is for the half-hourly price to go down and down. So you need to clear the market every 20 years or every 15 years with a PPA, so that it doesn't mean it's subsidized, it means that you get a fixed price so you can repay your capital cost. So I think all of those trends together mean that the market for corporate PPAs is growing. And of course, companies like Google, who want to make a demonstrable position in terms of improving their CO2 footprint. But like the point that's already been made by Francois, they won't do it purely out of the goodness of their heart. It has to make commercial sense, but equally there is a very strong driver to do it, and that's why we're keen to become part of that market. I think the how, well, I think the how is really to reach out to those companies, talk to them about our project pipeline, where we're developing, which projects are the most promising, how does it match their requirements, and it's a lot of hard work talking to potential counterparties and building up prospects for the future. But I think that what we're seeing is a wider market and a deeper market, and a market that is covering more and more sectors, not just the tech sector, but the retail sector, the manufacturing sector, and I can only see that trend increasing over time.
Well, thank you. So maybe you make a deal after the roundtable with François. And François, please tell us maybe more details why it makes sense from a financial, economic point of view to buy wind energy.
Yeah, so one thing that, you know, I've been working on the European market for like 10 years, and the first thing when we did our first data center looking for contracts, one of the things that was interesting is long-term contract was not available simply. And so there is a good thing with we found with those renewable deals is we actually can enter into very long-term contract. It's good for us because it gives us certainty. There's been a lot of volatility in the power price market in Europe over the last 10 years. Obviously, if you think about the prices of energy 10 years ago, everybody was saying, okay, we'll go up. Actually, it did not, right? Clearly not. And that's good for us as a customer, but in a way, we can't really predict, you know, our cost, and that's a problem in a way. So certainty that those PPA has brought, with like typically there are 10-year commitment with, like for instance, in the Nordics, we've done fixed price, so it gives us a price certainty. So this is definitely something that the renewable PPA have made available, where the other typical supply contract were not able to offer in a way.
But so it gives you certainty, but would you say that it's cheaper so far or not yet? Maybe it will be cheaper on the long run.
Again, so when we look into those deals, we have to take a view on a 10-year basis. And the view we have, and I mean, nobody knows really what the market will do, right? But from what we hear, and we had advisor, obviously, those deals that should be relatively close to market, right? So obviously we'll see in 10 years if this prediction is true, but this was the element and the data that drove our decisions.
Yes, well, anyway, we keep saying that in the end, renewable energy will be cheaper and fossil fuels will be more expensive.
And
that will happen.
We've already seen that because, like in the Nordics market, we've seen the levelized cost of energy, from what we hear from people, going down significantly. There's new technology, new turbine, more efficient, being able to get more yield out of a single site, and we see that happening, right? And we haven't done a lot of solar, although we'd like to do this, because typically solar has been more expensive.
Even in the US?
In the US for PPA, we've done mostly wind,
Okay.
but we'd like to do solar as well, and we hear that some solar technology is getting really cheaper now and getting to a point where it's not 2 or 3 times the market, and that's actually good because that means more balanced portfolio for us as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Mr. Costera, you mentioned that you were going more and more to the North American market, well, the US market. And there you already have lots of corporate clients, I think. So would you say that the American market is more adapted to this kind of deals with corporate clients than is the, for example, European one?
Very much so. For instance, with Google, we have a 200 megawatt tax equity partnership in the US. The thing is, this does not happen, this is not just a market trend. This happens by design, meaning the way that the US,
in the US,
the US incentive market is designed, it was inevitable that this would happen. First thing we have to understand is that beyond RPSs, which then leads utilities to buy a certain quantity of their energy from renewable sources, the main pillar of the US energy transition is production tax credits. That means that basically if you invest 100, the US federal government will give you 30 in US credits, $30 million. Most of wind developers don't have tax bases to absorb this. So they have to find ways to turn this into money. The first of all is tax equity partnerships, which allow developers such as us to partner with companies such as Google, Amazon, or banks, which, by the way, were the first in this business. So they can absorb that tax base, and these companies will bring the money up front, and that will reduce our effort. Okay? So this was the first way in for corporate customers, which they were not customers back then, but investors, into the renewable arena. And then there's another issue that we did not mention. Energy is very cheap because there's lots of wind in the US. The machines are much better now than they were 5 years ago. Everything is more effective. But the truth is that the PTCs, the production tax credits, lower the price of energy by almost 25%. So this is a subsidy. Whereas in Europe, consumers pay the full price of energy, in the US, consumers pay a part of the price of energy and taxpayers pay for the rest part, for the remainder. This is not bad, but it's different. So when we compare the prices, we should take this into consideration. So for the US customer, so you have like two possibilities to benefit from this scheme. Cheaper energy and the possibility to co-invest. So that makes a big change. This does not happen in Europe. Let's say the incentivization schemes cannot find their way to the market through corporate companies. Okay? So that's a big difference. I'm not saying which one is the better, but they're definitely different and hard to compare.
Okay, and in which sectors do you have more corporate customers, or what do you see in the US? In which sectors do they come more and more towards renewables?
Regarding tax equity, which is the main ones are still financial companies, like at the Wells Fargo, Bank of America. But from, let's say, industrial, so to speak, companies, we're seeing, of course, the likes of Google, which is massive. We have seen that also for us. But also Amazon, General Motors, Home Depot, Walmart, they're all shopping around, and we're talking with all of them, and we're hopefully closing a few business with some of them.
Big companies with big needs in energy.
Exactly.
Okay.
And with some complexity, because it's not the same as purchasing energy from your regular utility. These contracts have a certain complexity, which most of the companies are not familiar with. And even for us, it requires, let's say, more complexity, because we have, when you're dealing with utilities, they will give you a contract and you just have to sign. You can discuss a few things, but it's basically their rules. When we're talking about with corporate customers and they're talking with independent producers, well, there's lots of grounds that can be discussed, lots of the conditions that can be settled between two parties. So this requires for more origination effort, more negotiation effort from the companies. But again, it's also easier to talk with a corporate customer than it is with a regular utility. And we know that because we used to be a regular utility. So.
Okay, well, we'll get back to the differences in working with corporate customers or utilities. Mr. Davis, being based in North America, in the United States, I guess you agree with most of what Mr. Kostra just said, but do you see any risks that could make the US market less adapted to this kind of deals? Like, for example, we mentioned the PTC. I remember writing for years about will it be, will it still be there next year, or will it be stopped and suppressed, and then what will happen and everything? So we understood that so far the US market is very adapted to this kind of deals, but is there any risk that it might change in the future?
I'll get to your question, but
First,
to frame it, this is a very powerful trend. And the trend I'm talking about is where customers are making the decisions that drive the market, as opposed to the regulators. So there's been mention of RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standards. which are government decisions that a certain amount of renewable power must be in the system purchased by the utilities. Here in Europe, where the feed-in tariff is more the driver, there are specific megawatt numbers associated with those feed-in tariffs. The government is deciding what's the right amount of renewable power. This change, where corporates are buying large amounts of power through power purchase agreements, coupled with the parallel wave in distributed energy, where corporates and other types of customers are buying energy right on their facilities, is all part of a very powerful trend where customers are making these decisions now. And the customers are basically saying that at the prices renewable power is available, the government has undershot it. The government has not required enough of this renewable power to get into the system, so we're going to take measures in our own hands. And the rules are allowing that more and more. If you look at the map that was shown earlier, there's reasons why the wind turbines show up in certain regions and not in others, and it's related to the rules. So to get to your question, I think there are two risks. One is that the pricing somehow changes, and that largely may be related to the loss of the production tax credit. So the reason that the US is ahead of Europe in this regard is largely because the price of power to a seller like us is about equal whether we're selling to the utility or we're selling to a corporate. And so we're there in the market. Similarly, from the corporate side, power is too expensive given the price that's set by the feed-in tariffs for them to do too much of that. But in the US, that's now at a point of indifference. And so we're signing many PPAs with utilities, we're signing PPAs with corporate equally. If PTC goes away, it could change that pricing dynamic, but I think that's just a temporary phenomenon. We show projections of what happens in the market if PTC goes away, and there is a dip, but then it comes roaring back. So I think it may be a short-term phenomenon in that regard. The other piece of it, which is a little bit more complex discussion, is related to stranded costs. So as corporates decide what generating resources go onto the system, they're doing that outside of any planning process. And the consequence of that may be that certain assets that are already embedded and paid for are not fully paid for, but are embedded and need to be paid for, are no longer getting the revenue streams that they need because the system has shifted. Regulators may step in at that point and impose fees on people to pay for those stranded costs. And that could happen in any number of ways, but it could also have a temporary effect on the marketplace. The numbers you saw are impressive in terms of corporate buying, but they're not at the point to move the needle yet. But once you see those numbers double and triple, regulators will say, what is the consequence to the system overall, and do we have to shift the balance of who pays for this? So that could also be a chilling effect for a short period of time in isolated regions. In the long term, though, this is the direction that it's headed, both in Americas, but here in Europe as well.
Yes, well, let's come back to Europe with François, because that's where you buy wind energy.
That's right. And actually, I wanted to clarify one thing. The jurisdiction where we've done PPA in Europe are actually relatively similar to the US in a way, because they're not feed-in tariff. So if you go to Sweden, actually, there's not a feed-in tariff system. The developer get the revenue stream from the power and also from what they call certificate, which is actually very confusing because it's actually the name for the subsidy, but the reality is not the green attribute like the RECs in the US. So what we've done is actually secure the power revenue stream. The wind farms still get the subsidy like the PTC in the US. And so therefore you could compare that market to some like US market. And I think that wherever there was feed-in tariff, we had initial discussion, but the market structure wasn't very conducive to us doing this kind of deal. So it's interesting because what we talked about already is there will be some change potentially on feed-in tariff system. It's actually potentially an opportunity for more partnership between developers and corporate buyers or utilities, right, for that matter. So I think it's important to mention that.
And what are the main obstacles for you to extend maybe what you do in Northern Europe to other parts of Europe?
Yeah, so maybe to...
Except the feed-in tariffs.
Yeah, so definitely the market structure is very important. That was probably the first thing we looked at when we started thinking, okay, we should do those kind of thing in Europe. I would say at the beginning there was also a lot of market awareness or market kind of self-realization that, yeah, a corporate buyer can actually do this. The structure was important. Like in the Nordics, there's no need for license. So any company can actually buy renewable energy. So that's a very soft kind of regulatory framework that helps. And also the fact that a PPA, fixed price, could make sense was a remote concept to a lot of people we talked to. But, after they talked to their banks or looked at their financing, they found that pretty attractive, actually. So that's kind of the market education we have to do in other market or market kind of understanding. The other thing also that was important is definitely we have a base load consumption. Renewable energy is intermittent, so we had to find a way to do this transfer
Balance.
and how we solve this mismatch. This is still kind of a thing in progress, and ideally in the future we can add storage, we can add a lot of things that would make this even better and even a nicer story. But at the moment, we found a pretty good solution for that. So those two are very important, like the market understanding, the market being able to welcome this, and also the technical, from production to consumption, the whole ecosystem needs to also adapt to that.
Yes, and from the technical point of view, you also, because you buy, I can't remember exactly where, but not in the same country where the facility is.
So, for instance, right now we use our Swedish PPAs mostly to feed the Finnish data center. So we've actually, we had done 3 deals in Sweden totaling around 170 megawatt of wind nameplate capacity. This is because the Nord Pool system is very integrated. I mean, you could buy power in one country, Nord Pool, use it in another country, very seamless. If Europe as a whole would be the same, that'd be the ideal for our strategy, obviously. So that's why all the talk we hear or we watch around energy union, we think are very important. Like the more seamless the market is, the more the corporate buyers like ourselves will be able to commit for more volumes and for longer term, because they'll be able to reshift where they need the capacity, actually. And so having a very fluid market is reassuring for the consumer, right? So that's...
We even have this super grid European project. I don't know where it stands now, but where you could have windmills from Northern Europe and solar panels from southern of Mediterranean.
Yeah, absolutely. That would allow to diversify the portfolio for us as well. I know the European Union has a big agenda. I think yesterday we had the VP of Energy Union here. They've done the summer package. We're looking at that. We're very interested to see how it will develop, because this is a cornerstone to our strategy as a corporate buyer, for sure.
And there is something else you have to deal with, not only the intermittence, but to know how much energy you will need in, let's say, 5-6 years. How do you deal with that when you buy it for 10 years?
Yeah, so obviously there is a lot of business reason why our forecast could be wrong. I think we have a good idea of what we need maybe in the next few years, maybe, but
maybe
after
the
that...
most difficult part is innovation. Maybe you will need 3 times less energy to run your
Yeah, absolutely.
centers.
That's a great point. We are definitely... The greenest kilowatt hour is the one you don't consume, right? You all know that, and this is this is our first priority in our data center. So we're leading in terms of energy efficiency, and hopefully maybe we'll have contracted too much power. That'd be a good thing. But in a way, it's still something. If you have a 10-year contract, well, you still have power, and it could be considered as an asset almost, and then you could potentially partner with other people to use that power. So I think we shouldn't be kind of constrained by the fact that, we don't know what we're going to need, so therefore we don't do anything. And that has been the point, the line we've been taking.
Okay, thank you. I will just stop for a very quick moment to tell you if any of you has questions to ask in the middle of the discussion, please raise your hands. Otherwise, we'll have a time for hand. Otherwise, we'll have a time for questions at the end of the roundtable. Please, if you could present yourself. Thank you.
My name is Theo Holtum, and my company is Wind Farm Analytics. And I find it very interesting what Glenn Davis says about wind companies in the absence or as government subsidy schemes are removed, move over to this business model. And do you think, in response to the intermittency question, wind energy companies may now also start developing energy storage alongside wind farms to serve this market? Thank you.
Thank you.
As I mentioned in my opening remarks, RES is certainly viewing the market now much more broadly than wind along the lines that you've talked about, and energy storage is one of the places where we've established a leadership position, certainly in North America and prospectively globally, driven by the concepts that you've just introduced. I will say that where energy storage is optimally placed depends very much on the system, the demands, the ability to deal with the intermittency from a system basis, or whether that intermittency needs to be dealt with at the generation site. Most places where you look at that question, the answer is the optimal location for storage is separate from the generating system. And that's largely on robust grids that need that storage capability to deal with a much bigger intermittency question than just that particular wind project, and to take advantage of the balancing that's inherent in the system itself. So in most places, you will not see generation and storage coupled together, at least at the utility scale. At the facility, it's a little bit different. Yeah, so this is the case. If curtailment is driven by transmission constraints and you're dealing with transmission constraints that are unique to that generating site, storage then does start to be an important component of managing the constraints that are specific, again, to that generation project. And those do exist. Plus, on top of that, you have islands like Hawaii and Puerto Rico, which don't have the robust system to deal with the intermittency that renewable generation brings to it. So they also have requirements of localized storage and smoothing functions. But on balance, that's going to be the minority of applications for storage.
Yes, of course, please.
I take the point entirely on curtailment, but even there, it's not necessarily the best solution to use storage. We've done a number of studies where we have had curtailment in our US projects, and often building a new transmission line, if it can be done, is substantially cheaper than an embedded storage.
But as you say, if it can be done, because, for example, in Germany, it's pretty difficult to have those constructed right now.
Indeed, and that's why I say it's very, very site-specific. And of course, that will change. The costs of storage are falling, and the relative economics are changing. But we shouldn't assume that it's always the right solution to put storage with a large-scale wind farm. That isn't necessarily the right answer, as Glenn said.
Yeah, well, keep the mic, please, because I was going to ask you, we heard about changing patterns in Europe with the end of feed-in tariffs and everything. So do you think it will become easier for E.ON, for example, to, enter this segment of clients because of the way the regulation will change over time?
Well, as I already said, that one of the fundamental reasons we are splitting E.ON into two different entities, with one with very much a focus on customers, is to recognize that two different markets are emerging. And the E.ON group with a focus on customers, grids, and renewable energy is very much being set up to take advantage of this trend and to make sure we serve customers in every way we can, whether that's individual domestic customers with embedded renewable energy solutions, embedded storage solutions, smart meters to manage demand, and there's another way of managing the intermittency is demand-side management and smart use of the information that is generated by customers. And of course, that extends to large customers who may want power purchase agreements. So the very nature of the new E.ON is exactly that, to address customer needs, whatever they are, however large, however small, and to build a business focused on customer centricity.
Thank you. Mr. Durkee, what do you think about the way the European regulation is evolving, this end of feed-in tariffs, maybe more like auctions systems and these kind of things? Do you think it's good? Do you think we have to be careful about the way it happens? Is it risky for you all?
Well, feed-in tariff have been the way to launch and to develop the renewables and wind energy in particular, and has been very successful. However, the sector has become mature, and it is now fair, and say it's reasonable to expose the sector to expose it more to market signals, to price signals, and the dynamics that you may have getting out of a feed-in tariff. And in doing so, the guideline for state aid are clearly indicated in auctions as a new way to get incentives in Europe. Now, auction by themselves can be an excellent instrument. They have been successful in various countries, in Brazil, for instance. But I would say the devil is in the details. They have to be handled very carefully. And I can focus on a couple of issues that make the difference between having successful growth with auctions or basically stop of growth because of that. The first issue that I would mention is how the auctions are designed. And we have a specific example of that, which is Italy. Before auctions, we were building at a pace of about 1 gigawatt per year. Auctions have been meant to halve that pace, to go somewhere to between 400 and 500 megawatts per year. But as a matter of fact, since the date auctions were introduced in 2013 today, they were fully subscribed, but only 25% of the megawatts that were subscribed have actually been built. And there are specific reasons for that, which again are strictly related to the auctions were designed. And the basic issue is that the selection mechanism to access auctions was not proper. In other words, who access an auction has to have the financial and technical ability to build the project once the incentive is awarded. And he has to prove that because he has to deposit a bank guarantee or a similar instrument. If you don't have that, you will have a participation to the auctions of players who actually try to get the incentive from the auction, not because they are capable to build just thereafter, but because that is a way to try to sell the project after. And that has been the main cause of failure in Italy. A second issue related to the auctions concerns developers. Currently, developers in some European countries are in a sort of privileged position because the goodwill that is associated to a project once it is consented is extremely high. We have seen projects that are sold at goodwill of about 1 million per megawatt, 1 million euro per megawatt, while the development costs are a fraction of that. An auction will stop all that. And that is fair, it's reasonable, but the risk is that you go totally on the other side. Because today, especially if you are a smaller mid-sized developer, you find someone who is ready to finance you, mainly banks, but also private equity, because there is so much value associated to the project that it's not an issue to get the financing. But auction will introduce a lot of uncertainty, and it is questionable if small and mid-sized developers will manage to have access to the source of financing as I have today. Secondly, auctions clearly privilege high wind projects. If you have a middle-low wind project, you have low chances to win, and most likely you won't invest, you won't develop that project because you have low chances. Similar thing for the local acceptance. If you see that you have a risk that the project is not widely accepted locally, you increase the risk that it will take years to have it accepted, and maybe when you get the permit, the turbines that you have used to get the permits are no longer updated, and again, you will not be competitive enough. So to sum up, I think nobody is questioning auctions, but auctions have to be very carefully designed and planned. Industry needs to have certainty. We need to have clear rules that give certainty to investors that every megawatt which is put on auction will actually be built. You have to know that there is a calendar, there is a schedule for the auction which will be maintained. And if you look what is happening, for instance, in UK and Poland, is exactly vice versa. So if you don't have that, the fear is that the growth will no longer be there. And the level of expectation and targets that are associated to the wind business in order to achieve the 2020 targets and later the 2030 might be impaired.
Thank you very much. We'll maybe go back to the differences it makes for you to work with utilities versus corporate clients. Mr. Costera already mentioned some, so you said it was easier in a way because you more or less speak the same language in a way. Well, it's business language, let's say. And but there are different. Well, you have to adapt to the needs, and maybe they don't know as much as utilities know about this sector. But what are the consequences for you? Is it longer to build projects with them? Is it more costly? How do you deal with this?
No, what I was saying is we don't speak the same language. The thing is that when you deal with an utility, you have to speak their language. Okay, so when you're talking with a commercial or industrial customer, we have to come to an agreement on which language to speak. We don't have an imposed language. Okay, that's the big difference. I would say that normally, of course, it takes longer because you have to agree a lot of things. Whereas when you're let's say the RPS, meaning it's an auction organized by a utility, it's very much the same as an auction organized in Europe. The terms are set. You just have to comply and come in with the lowest price. Of course, then you can discuss a few things, but there's very little, let's say, room for imagination there. What does this mean from our perspective? Of course, it requires more manpower to deal with commercial and industrial customers that have particular requirements that you have to adapt, be it on the invoicing side, be it on the, let's say, the shaping of the energy.
Do you have specific teams to work on?
Sure, yeah. Sure. It's the origination teams that need to be, let's say, stronger than those who simply answer to RPS standards organized by an utility. But that's as far as it goes. It doesn't change dramatically the way you organize things, even from a financing perspective. A PPA with good companies such as Google or Amazon or Microsoft is as good as gold for the financing community. They don't see any difference between that or having a PPA with, let's say, a Tennessee utility. It's the same thing.
Okay, well, thank you. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on this because there is definitely, I think, a discovery process where even on our side as a corporate buyer, the first transaction we did, we got kind of a template more from a utility, and clearly we have focused on different things. We don't have the same portfolio, etc. So the first deal always takes more time. You have to adapt the contractual framework, etc. But what we've seen is once you've gone through that, then you have a repeat success that is pretty high. For example, we extended our relationship with a developer called Ox2 and Allianz, which is a final owner, the first deal took a long time. Second deal that was done took nearly no time. So once you get to the entry barrier to do this, I think that's the repeat is fairly straightforward. That's our experience.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Davis. Would you have some comments to make on that? Because
in North America, we've had to compete to win power purchase agreements for decades. And that has created in our North American business a customer-driven culture that is only now really being transferred to the rest of the company, because in a feed-in tariff environment, you don't really have a power customer. You just show up and get your contract, or no contract, whatever it is, right? In a customer-driven environment that we've got now, hopefully company-wide, but originating in North America, when you come at it, the utility will, as a customer, will present certain challenges. Google as a customer will present certain challenges. They're different challenges, but from the point of view of speaking, you always have to speak the customer's language. And you always have to come at it and try to solve the problem for the customer in a way that makes the proposition still worthwhile for us. And so, utilities, on the one hand, utilities do a lot of these deals, and so the contract comes relatively rigid. So that creates one set of problems. With a corporate, especially those who are just getting into the game, or Google, 5 years ago when it was just getting into the game, there's a learning curve. There's no standard contract. So the other challenge is, well, you got to create from scratch a brand new contract, and that has its own set of challenges. But the bottom line is, if the customer-driven mindset drives the company, you'll get through it. And so the big challenge for us in Europe is to make that transition so that we put the same emphasis on meeting the customer's needs that we do elsewhere in the business, now in a market that is evolving to a point where if you don't do that, you're not going to succeed.
And are there already, except North American companies like yours, are there other companies in Europe that are, yes, IKEA and Unilever, I think, they are already buying some
Well, I don't have exact data on this, but I've heard, and I'd be keen to hear what you guys have seen as well, is the same sector. The retail is pretty active as well. We've heard about this quite a lot, actually.
Okay, so there are customers, in Europe. Mr. Durkee, you touched on that point already about the maybe actors becoming more and more financial companies than industrial ones. But yes, you wanted to have a point about how you see the market changing and what might be the consequences on that, not directly linked to the corporate client subject, but on the seller side.
Yeah, indeed, we discussed about the buyer side, but I think a word is useful to mention also on the other side of the barricade, at least as far as Europe is concerned, because it's obvious that wind is not PV, so utility scale will remain the only way new wind power will be deployed. And if we look at the past years, the model was pretty clear. The utilities and APP were the main investor, were the main developer, which built up capacity. However, there has been a growing interest of financial players in this sector. And you may see it in different ways. You have seen pension funds, infra funds, insurers, and all of them have been looking at the sector from different angles and pursue different strategies. So in some cases, which I would say is probably the majority, they have tried to invest in the sector by taking minority shares, even consistent, even large, but minority shares in large players. So they have not changed the way capacity is built, who are the operators, and on the contrary, they managed to bring capital at a low cost within the sector. But this is not the only way they have done. If you look at some players, for instance, take Allianz. Allianz is an insurer which is now one of the largest players in Europe. We have about 1 gigawatt in the in wind farm in the Eurozone. So we have a size which is absolutely comparable to the largest utilities. And that's a totally different paradigm for this kind of players. So I think there is an open question whether in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time, who will be the main players in wind energy in Europe, if the current pattern of having a larger utility or IPP having most of the capacity and therefore being the counterparty for corporate clients will remain as such, or we will see a totally different picture where financial players, through the low cost of capital they have, will gradually take their place, and utilities will more and more move to other countries like emerging countries, Latin America, South Africa, etc., where these kind of financial players don't like to go.
And would you say this is dangerous? Do you fear this evolution?
Well, if you are one of the players that have to go away, it may be dangerous, but not necessarily for the sector. I tend to think that if the financial players decide to invest through the players through the industrial players, that will be the ideal combination of skills on one side and low cost of the capital on the other side. But I respect a different model. Certainly, it is a type of player which is totally different. They have a way to manage their asset with far away from the way an utility or a traditional player would do it. So it can change significantly the way also energy will be sold in a world which goes more and more towards PPA and abandon progressive feed-in tariff. So certainly we change things, not necessarily for the bad, but we'll change things.
Okay, well, thank you. Do you want to react on this point?
Yes, comment on what Massimo said. The fact that financial institutions are getting in big time everywhere, but also in Europe, and that was also true in the US, really changes the game for companies such as ours, that's for sure. We cannot compete on the cost of capital, therefore the development that we used to do through mergers and acquisitions is pretty much impossible right now, especially for de-risked assets, things that were already built or ready to build. Right now, it's almost impossible in, let's say, in the best countries in Europe to find anything where we are competitive with the likes of Allianz, for instance. But the difference is huge. Okay? So this pushes, I would say this will lead to two trends. The first of all is that also companies such as ours, if we want to keep developing in Europe, and we do, we have to do more greenfield ourselves, which is in the markets where we've been quite successful doing that, and we have to, that would be the source of the real value growth in these markets. M&A is sincerely, you won't generate substantial value by that, safe particular situations, but it won't be that relevant. And the other thing is to get these financial institutions to invest through you so that you can rotate the assets that you already have. And probably that's something that we've been doing, trying and selling minority participations in the wind farms that we own in these markets, and that will allow us to invest more and keep on investing. So we've been already raised more than, I think it's €1.5 billion over the last 2 years in this kind of transactions. And we will continue to do so because it's a really cheap source of capital. And for them, they get what they want, which is a revenue stream with a decent yield for the kind of yields that they require, which are different from ours.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lewis, yes.
Yeah, just a couple of points. Firstly, on the financial investors, I think we ought to be a little bit cautious as to whether this might be a more temporary trend. After all, we have very unusual circumstances at the moment with lowest interest rates for 200 to 300 years, sustained for several years by the monetary policy of the ECB and the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve. Huge amounts of new money being created. So I would caution whether that is a permanent situation. The second point is about what challenges the new corporate market brings, and I think it's already been alluded to some extent. But of course, in the past, when you just turned up, as Glenn put it, to collect your feed-in tariff or your green certificate, you could take as long as was reasonable to get planning permission, and you knew the tariff was going to be there. I think the challenge we now have is a coordination challenge to make sure that the plant is built at the time when the PPA is activated. Now, we've always had that challenge to some extent in the US, where we have utility off-takers. That's not a challenge we've experienced so much in Europe. So I think everybody's going to have to get a lot better at making sure that the planning system and the approval system works well in a European context, so that the buyers can expect a plant to be producing at the time when they want the offtake. And I think that's something that buyers and sellers both have to work through.
One of the reasons that costs of renewable energy is coming down, in addition to all the technology gains, is that, at least in the North American market, these dynamics that you're talking about mean that the projects that shouldn't be built don't get built, right? Because, and that's a consequence of the competitive process. It's a consequence of the timing issues. That it's incumbent upon us as the developers of these projects to work through those issues. And the ones that can do it will succeed, and the ones that don't will fail at the corporate level and at the project level, which is a good thing from our perspective.
Okay.
One of the difference we have versus the US market is that we talk about Europe, but actually we're talking about 28 different states. And if you look at the recent years, there have been several countries where retroactive measures were taken that paralyzed the sector. If you look at what's happening in Romania and Spain, as what Paolo was saying earlier on, they have impaired the growth. They have completely stopped it. So if you look at what happened in 2014, we had 10 gigawatts of growth roughly in Europe. And 50% of that was in Germany and France. We had large regions. We had Spain, we had Italy, we had the Balkans, we had East Europe, with the exception of Poland, where almost nothing was built. So, and that is beyond power and the levels of a player like us. It is because of a regulatory fault that has not been corrected. We have tried several times to have a strong intervention from Brussels to sanction countries which took retroactive measures to restore confidence, but that never happened. So the only thing you can do, you pay the damages and you leave a country, or in any case, you don't invest any further. And if we don't find a way to address that, we keep on talking about Europe, but actually, we will be speaking of a fraction of that.
Yes, Mr. Kostra.
Just adding on that, to say that if we don't tackle this kind of issues, we should not even bother doing the big interconnections. Because if you don't know what's at the other end of the interconnection, why bother, right? So let's say an interconnected Europe means that the regulations should be the same, and we should have at least or hopefully the same level of legal trustworthiness that we have, for instance, in the United States and in some countries of Europe. But unfortunately, this is not the same everywhere. So before spending lots of money in interconnections, which, by the way, is fine, please tackle the regulations. They should also interconnect the regulations, otherwise it's useless.
Between France and Spain and France and Italy, we just have biggest connection.
Yeah,
yes.
that would be great.
Lots of money.
That would be great. But again, if you don't know exactly what's the obligations or let's say the possibility that you have to sell your energy, for instance, in France, because right now you know what you can expect if you build a wind farm in France. It's perfect. It's very stable. It's been there for quite a while. It will be there for quite a while more. So it's one of those countries you can invest without no problem, and you see that on the kind of price that you get for the assets when you sell them. It's really good, okay? But I have no certainty whatsoever. It's not been discussed that I can build a wind farm in Spain and sell my energy here, even if I have interconnection. It's not said anywhere. I can sell it probably at the pool price, but that does not give an incentive to anyone, not only renewables, to build a power plant. Nobody's building power plants in Europe, by the way, unless they're under these kind of schemes. Because the problem is that you don't have anywhere the investment signs for investors to put a single dime in one new power plant. So until you address that, skip the interconnections.
Okay. Well, thank you for this. Maybe time for questions about what's just been discussed. Yes, sir. I don't know what. Yeah.
I fully agree with what has been said, and I would like to have a comment from all of you about the European policy for 2030 for setting renewables target non-binding.
Who wants to answer that question? To all. You all have to answer.
Non-binding target is a contradiction in terms.
Maybe you're allowed to not answer because you're not concerned directly by the European policy, but your company is.
Yeah, I don't have the detailed knowledge to answer, but I will say in relation to what I said earlier about the trend of customers driving the decision as to what's the right amount of renewables. If the market and the rules in Europe allow the customers to speak, then a non-binding target is fine, because the customer ultimately should make that decision. But if the rules don't allow that to happen in a complete way, then you're back to relying on what the government mandates to be the right amount of renewables, and then a non-binding target doesn't mean anything in that context.
Well,
yeah, maybe just to answer on this as well. I think you have more than 2/3 of the global 100 companies that have greenhouse gases kind of voluntary programs.
Pledges.
So this is not going to be the only answer, but I think that will definitely help. But I would say there is no, actually in the state we've done agreement, there is actually no target, right? In most of the state in the US there's no target, yet we still have done agreement. So I think the social responsibility programs of corporate will definitely help a bit.
It's a little bit like in the COP21, like will there be a binding agreement or not, and is what's going to be decided within the negotiations is as important as all the pledges from cities and companies, and this is a big question. But then again, you're right, it depends on what you can do, what you have the right to do, otherwise what we make you do. Yes, Mr. Delke.
I just wanted to give an answer, more general one. If you look at the Energy Union package, it's an ambitious plan. It's a great one, and it addresses most of the issues. But the big question is not strictly on the plan itself, on the targets, on how it's envisaged, but the big question is on the governance. How will those targets will be achieved? And the example of a non-binding target at the national level of the 27% is one of the most blatant examples, but it's not the only one. And only if the Commission will manage to have a strong and strict governance on the member states, the Energy Union plan will become a reality. I think that is the real question, and the answer is not ready yet. We will see what will be the mechanism and what will be the reaction of the member states, because at the end of the day, it is in the hands of the member states to accept a broader and a wider European governance or to reject it and maintain the prerogatives on energy.
But not all member states are on the same line on those questions, as you know, so, and all have to agree. So.
I mean, I will answer the question indirectly by saying the Obama Clean Energy Plan will not be voluntary. If you want to achieve a target, you have to make it mandatory.
Yes.
Complementing on that, when you have, and I also agree that the customers should ultimately decide, but the truth is that here you have customers and you have taxpayers. And the truth is that the American taxpayer is paying at least 1/3 of all the investments that we are doing, and I don't think that nobody asked them that directly. So there needs to be government intervention if you are to change the way you generate and consume energy in a big country or a big region like the European Union. Sincerely, I'm not for planned economy, not at all, but I don't think that the energy transition can be done simply by the pressure of the citizens. I wish
Only
it
in
was
Germany.
possible.
Ultimately, that's a price question, all right? What's happening in the US is that there's a perceived price gap between conventional energy or market price energy and what renewable energy brings. When the government provides a production tax credit or investment tax credit, it closes that gap, right? And then perhaps the state has a renewable portfolio standard, but it's getting to the point where even in the absence of renewable portfolio standard, on a price-based decision, customers are deciding. You take away that support, now you're left to technology advances and other things and the price of natural gas and the market price generally, equilibrating in the absence of that government support. By 2030, is that going to happen in Europe? Maybe, hopefully. I think we're optimistic about it. If it doesn't, there are mechanisms besides mandating megawatts, price supports, pricing carbon, whatever it is that makes renewable energy more attractive at some level than conventional energy, putting a price on that, and maybe the taxpayers do step up for that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Theo Holton, Wind Farm Analytics. Question for Google. The corporate social responsibility targets, how ambitious are they in general, as well as in your company, and are they purely voluntary? Do you think we can rely on them, or might they disappear in one night? Just one quick point on energy storage at the end of transmission lines is you will much better utilize your transmission line. For instance, you could install 25 or 30 gigawatts of wind on a 10 gigawatt transmission line. So for this reason, it's beneficial. And companies who are maintaining and building transmission lines obviously are getting revenue from the transmission lines, but the rest of us, it would be useful to do that. But yeah, the question is about corporate social responsibility targets. Are they reliable, and how ambitious are they?
Yeah, although I'd be very interested to hear what the debate about on-site versus off-site storage, but that's a separate question. I guess just what I haven't mentioned is Google has been carbon neutral from 2007. We're also buying carbon offsets.
By offsetting. Yeah.
Offsetting, not by electricity, but more traditional carbon offsets. So I think this is very dear to our founders' heart, and they want to be part of the climate, the fight against climate change. The only reason why they would probably change, that would change it if it is complete. Our founders leaves, and that's not been the case for the moment. But I see when we discuss with other corporation, this, I don't know, it doesn't sound like people want to go back to like they really believe in those kind of goals and target they've set up, and you see more and more. So I think there's a trend right now.
Well, I think companies like yours and others we've seen that have been using this kind of things in a marketing way, which I'm not criticizing,
right, yeah.
And we are in direct contact with the end customer, it would be very risky for them to go backwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Questions there, please?
Wei Hei from Statoil in Norway. My question is, do you see some new opportunities for the wind energy to achieve the cost reduction by combining and more close work together with the other industry? For example, the onshore wind work together with the agriculture, food production, and forest wood production. Like for the offshore wind, maybe the offshore wind farm work together with the aquaculture. Thank you.
So more cost cutting or the cost would go down thanks to collaboration between different sectors, if I understood well.
I mean, just if I can answer briefly, we've seen in some countries some forest authority developing their wind farm themselves from their own needs, and they use the power directly, but they have maybe too much power, so they're looking for additional players to take off that power. Same thing with farmers in some jurisdictions, some farmers kind of getting together to do wind farm. On the data center side, there's definitely a lot of talk about how we use the heat to, use that heat generated by the data center to do other things. So this kind of partnership is developing. That's what we see.
It's kind of what we call circular economy, where you can use resources and from, well.
And I think in terms of onshore wind farm and forestry stroke paper companies, it's a very nice match. They have land, they have demand for electricity in the right location. So it can make sense. I think that also can help to drive down the cost of energy, but I would say it's not the ultimate solution. I think there are many different cooperations, and there will be different solutions that make sense in different locations. And obviously forestry and paper is one we've worked with in mid-Sweden, because it's a location where that industry is obviously very strong and where the wind resource is very strong, and there's a nice match. That won't always be the case, and we'll have to find other solutions.
Thank you. No more questions? Yes, please.
Joel Mechlaers, Public Affairs at the EWEA in Brussels. I think we have an excellent discussion on companies turning green and PPAs in Europe and the US. But in a couple of weeks we'll have a Paris Agreement, and I think at this moment we can already sort of say what many countries are going to do, given that we have 160 INDCs, UN language for climate pledges, coming in. More than 50 of these INDCs mention wind specifically as a preferred climate mitigation technology. So my question to some of the panelists is, what prospects do you see for power purchase agreements in some emerging economies? Perhaps not for the short-term future, but perhaps for the medium to long-term future. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Who wants to answer that?
There are countries which are already moving that way. I think that probably the most successful is Mexico, where almost new development is done under power purchase agreements between industry and developers. Another example would be Chile, with their northern mines. They're doing lots of those kinds of agreements, and in a different way, but also similar. Let's say the free market in Brazil is also working. There are lots of wind farms being developed, and they even have some advantages regarding the traditional ones for the free market, and which have PPAs with big industrial customers. I think it's something that we'll definitely see more and more, but in countries where the energy is competitive by itself. There's no need for any further subsidy or incentive, like the three cases I just mentioned, because they have a huge wind resource, or in some cases, as in Chile, it is much more expensive to do anything else over there because they are so far away that the transmission involved would be massive, so it's better to build them up there. So I think that you'll see a lot of that, but watch out. It's not everywhere in those countries that you have trustworthy counterparts. And if you're going to invest for 20 years, you need to be very sure, and your financer and your finance institutions that will back you up need also to be very sure that that company will still be there in 20 years' time, or it won't be nationalized, or it won't be gone elsewhere. So it's not like the universal panacea, but it's there, and it will be more and more.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I think we'll wrap it up here. And so I will thank you all, gentlemen, for your interesting point of view and for your questions and interest in the subject this morning. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a nice and rich day for the rest of the forum today. Thank you.
Wind farm could talk. What would it say? Would it tell you it's feeling good, productive, or that it's feeling tired or needs some backup? If your wind farm could talk, would it warn you of potential problems before they actually happen and help you discover new ways to turn wind into opportunity? Wind farms have a lot to say, and now you can listen. The future of wind farm technology is coming. Are you ready for it?